Hi, good evening. Welcome along to the Transfer Show. Michael Bridge and Rob Dorset here to analyse and dissect the day's top stories. And boy, have we got a lot of top stories. None more top, if that makes sense. What about Newcastle? Well, our reporter Keith Downey has the latest from there.
They made that first bid on Saturday morning that was turned down by Leipzig. They asked them to come back with a different structure, different payment terms. Newcastle did that and more, and raised their offer last night to €80 million, so around about £70 million plus a potential £10 million in add-ons. So Newcastle's offer is actually €5 million more, should I say, than Manchester United's. As one source is telling us, maintains that the player favours a move to Manchester United over Newcastle United, and I think that will be hard, really difficult for the people in power here at Newcastle United, who have already seen multiple players slip through their fingers this summer to some of the top clubs in the country, and this looks like it could be another one of those. But worth saying, we've yet to hear back from either of the offers to Leipzig, and we've yet to get clarification from the player, and until that, as far as Newcastle are concerned, their bid is still live and on the table.
They both want him. Rob Dorset, who gets him?
At the moment, you have to say it looks like Manchester United. The sense I've been getting, and you heard from Peter Stevenson and Keith Downey there, the two men who know better than anybody, the tone that they're giving suspects that Manchester United are winning this race. And the impression I get from the people I've been speaking to is that Cesco has preferred a move to Old Trafford all the way along. And that from RB Leipzig's point of view, they've been waiting for Manchester United to reach the level of bid that Newcastle have made. They haven't quite done it yet. There's still some distance off it, €5-10 million, depending on the exact figures. But it's pretty clear that he would rather go to Old Trafford, and I think that leaves Newcastle in a very difficult position. Even though they can offer Champions League football, even though they finished so much higher, they finished 5th compared with Manchester United's 15th last season. We know that Manchester United have been in turmoil. Newcastle have been a very steady ship under Eddie Howe. They've been consistently improving, and yet that history of one of the world's biggest football clubs, I think, is probably going to tell in the end. Is
that it? Is that about what's gone before then? Because it doesn't make sense that Newcastle can offer Champions League football while Manchester United were, flirting with relegation last season, and yet they have the edge, apparently.
Maybe an everlasting thanks to Sir Alex Ferguson, possibly, because they are still Manchester United at the end of the day. But speaking to, Brian Mburmo, he didn't bother him about no European football. Does Champions League matter as much as people let on sometimes? A lot of the time it's a financial package, and it is playing for Manchester United. But look, it's not all over for Newcastle United at all, who, let's just say, since the takeover, have recruited ever so well. But, as Rob says, it does look as if now he is leaning towards Manchester United. But also got to mention the recruitment director, Christopher Favell, who was at Leipzig, who was speaking so highly about Cesco. I wonder if that's playing a key role in this as well. Not just Ruben Amorim, but Manchester United collectively.
But he's untried, untested, really, isn't he? And he's raw, clearly. What do you make of the sort of sums being spoken about forwards this summer?
This is absolutely fascinating, because I haven't known a transfer window like this one, where we've seen so many world-class strikers on the market, on the move, many of them coming to the Premier League. Let's show you some of the stats that we've been looking at, because I think this speaks absolute volumes. You can see some of the summer signings there, and just how much we're talking about. There's a star, of course, next to Benjamin Sesko, because that's not completed yet, but you can see that Hugo Ekitike is at the top of that one at £79 million. Gyökeres 63.5. Mateus Cunha, not a striker, he's a forward. Same with João Pedro, you'd say there. Look at the absolute bargain for Chelsea at the bottom, Liam Delap there with a £30 million release clause. I think it's right that you put him in this sort of category, this sort of company. I think he could be that good. But Mike, what I think is fascinating is, where do you get the value here with a striker? Do you get the value for somebody who is experienced, like Gyökeres, 27 years old, been there and done it, scored 92 goals in 103 games for Sporting?
Yeah, in which league though?
In the Portuguese Premier League. Yeah. But he's been there and done it. He's 27. He's a proven goal scorer. Arsenal, of course, were looking at Benjamin Sesko. They were monitoring for more than a year, and they decided no, they've gone for Gyökeres instead. They had the ace trump, the trump card here. They decided Gyökeres. They wanted somebody ready-made to go straight into their side, try and help them win Premier League titles, Champions League. They didn't have time to wait around for maybe 2 years for Benjamin Sesko at 22 to prove what he can do in the Premier League and become that sort of player. Is that where you get the value, experience and goals? Or is it a younger player like Cesco with incredible promise who's got years ahead of him and may grow into that Manchester United side? Remember, Gyökeres has signed a 5-year contract at Arsenal. He will be 32 when that comes to an end. Arsenal have got no resale on him after that. He's worth virtually nothing. Look at Heung-min Son, who we're going to talk to about at Spurs shortly. £15 million, maybe 20 million that Spurs are getting for him. That's a snip for a player of his quality, but he's in the last stages of his career. So Arsenal can afford to write that off because they've got no resale. It doesn't matter. They need a player ready now. Manchester United, Newcastle perhaps don't have that luxury, which is why Cesco is more attractive to them. But I think how you look at that striker bingo is going to be fascinating. We know that every single football fan in this country is doing what we're doing now. They're looking at that list of strikers and going, right, who's got the best player? Who's got the best deal? Who's going to do the best in 2 years' time? It's a fascinating debate, and it's going to go on between Newcastle and Manchester United.
Where's the value then in this list?
Well, if we've got the opportunity to see his record at Leipzig over the last couple of seasons, look, we could debate all day long what's the bigger and better league, Bundesliga or the Portuguese league. I love watching the Bundesliga a bit. Then you've got a lot of German experts. I was listening to Kevin Hatchard earlier. He said the real winners could actually be Leipzig because they're getting a lot of money for a very good player, but as Rob's mentioned, a 22-year-old.
Right, I said I was going to put you two on the spot. Let's do it now. Right, if you were a Newcastle fan, Michael, I'll start with you. Do you want a raw Benjamin Sesko or an Alexander Isak who's had his head turned?
I love game shows.
If you hadn't have put that, who's had his head turned?
I tell you what, I'm going to go with a happy Cesco who's turned down Manchester United because I feel, listening to a couple of Newcastle fans, I've got a couple of Newcastle mates that are really upset about the Isak situation. We know how much they adore their players up there, and if you upset them, you know. So I would.
He scores a couple of goals, first game of the season, all forgiven. We're all football fans.
That's
you know
true.
What we're like.
But are we going to get this in a year's time? I remember, a couple of years ago he talked about Harry Kane, Man City. Okay, Man City went away, then it was Bayern, Luka Modric, Chelsea. A year later it was Real Madrid. Do these things actually go away? So if it was me, get the Cesco and a little bit more money to go somewhere else. But look, I don't support Newcastle.
Luka Modric and Harry Kane didn't do bad in those years when they stayed, though. They were hardly down in tools, were they?
Wow. This is why I don't take these game shows seriously.
I think exactly the opposite. Alexander Isak is a proven goal scorer in the Premier League. I think he gets into every Premier League team in their starting 11, with the possible exception of Manchester City, because they've got not a bad player called Erling Haaland. But other than that, I think he gets into every single starting 11 in the Premier League. And Newcastle have had that. He's loved by the fans up there. I think the fans could get over this. I think Eddie Howe can get over this. We know that Alan Shearer's come out and criticised him, club legend. He's got to build some bridges if he stays at Newcastle, that's for sure. But he is worth a fortune. Newcastle think he's worth 110, 120 million pounds. Liverpool think he's worth 110 because that's what they bid for him. And Newcastle have turned that down. They don't want to lose him. They can build bridges. We've seen this in the past where players have wanted away. It hasn't happened, but they come back into the fold. Alexander Isak's got Champions League football to play with Newcastle this season if he stays. I think he can be kept happy. And for me, I'd take Alexander Isak every day over Benjamin Sesko.
What do Newcastle do if Isak goes to Liverpool and Cesco goes to Manchester United? What does Eddie Howe do?
Well, Newcastle have been, we need to be clear on this, Eddie Howe and Newcastle have been very, very clear behind the scenes. They will not sell Isak unless they get a player of proper calibre in to replace him. So I don't think that comes into it. And I think Newcastle can afford to stick by their guns there and say, no, you're not going anywhere.
What do you think?
I agree with that, yeah, totally. I think if Isak goes, then yes, but Eddie Howe's been very thorough on this. And I like what he said the other day, that people just don't walk straight back into training. They've got to earn it. So look forward to hearing from Eddie Howe now they've returned from South Korea.
Quick word about Newcastle here, because I think a lot of people have got sympathy for Newcastle here on the number of players they've missed out on, and if they miss out on Cesco. And you're asking the question, well, why would he choose Manchester United over Newcastle with Champions League football and all that Eddie Howe's achieving up there? I think it's interesting. Newcastle could blow Manchester United out of the water if they wanted to here. Let's assume they're going to get £120 million for Alexander Isak if he moves to Liverpool. They've already turned down 110. Well, they could spend all of that money on Cesco if they want to, and Manchester United couldn't get close to it. And I'm sure RB Leipzig could say, listen, Benjamin, you're going to United or you're staying put with us. But they haven't done that. Why haven't they done that? Because they're not sure that he's worth that. There's no point in replacing Alexander Isak, tried and tested in the Premier League, a world-class striker has done it at this level, with a raw 22-year-old, if you're paying almost as much money for him. Newcastle know that Cesco has a certain value and they're not prepared to go beyond that. That to me says a club being well run. Let me just throw the one other interesting. We've been talking about strikers, haven't we, in this programme? Of course, it's dominating the transfer window right now. Either Manchester United or Newcastle is going to miss out on Benjamin Sesko, and yet they're going to still want a striker. For Newcastle, it's going to be very difficult to reintegrate Alexander Isak. Keith Downey, our man up there, said earlier on that he expects that to happen. He thinks that's the most likely outcome now. But what about either of those two which fails to get Cesco looking elsewhere and thinking Nicholas Jackson at Chelsea, who, with the players that they've brought in,
for 80 to 100 million pounds,
which is an extraordinary amount of money, and that's what I can't understand.
Who's going to pay that?
I don't think anybody will pay that. But if you've got a situation that Chelsea have got now with the quality of players they've got in that position, having signed Liam Delap, having brought in João Pedro as well, I think it's going to be a struggle for Nicholas Jackson to get in ahead of either of those. All right, João Pedro is not necessarily a striker, but he can play up top as well. So you think Chelsea would be looking to maybe offload and get some money back for him? I think 80 to 90 is too much when you can buy Cesco for 74, by the way, the calibre of players that we're talking about. But I just wonder whether either Manchester United or Newcastle, if they can't get him, maybe looking to Chelsea to say, look, can we do a deal? I don't get it. Newcastle have got Champions League football. They finished 5th in the table. They have one of the best, most nurturing, creative managers in this country in Eddie Howe. He makes players better. If you go to Newcastle, I fail to believe any player would not get better going to Newcastle to play under Eddie Howe. And yet all of these players have turned down the opportunity to do so. I think it's difficult to criticise Newcastle from it. These are circumstances beyond their control. But no doubt, it's been a terrible window for Newcastle so far.
How much is the Isak situation hurting them? Because if you're a player looking in and you're thinking, well, why would I go there when this great player who scores goals and wins games wants out?
Well, if it was a striker, if it's Liam Delap or Hugo Ekitike, you think I'm taking his place anyway, so that doesn't really apply. I don't know, what do you think, Bridge? I
look at Newcastle and I think their midfield three is probably one of the best in the Premier League.
Yeah.
Joe Linton, who he converted to a midfielder, Sandro Tonali, who's come back from his ban and just shown his class, and Bruno Guimaraes. We talk about their recruitment. He's probably one of Newcastle's best ever signings. I'm not being funny, but he's brilliant. Every time I watch him, he's brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, Sven Botman's had his injuries, but you know they've got Aaron Ramsdale now in goal. So I totally agree on Eddie Howe, but I think this could be a really busy next few weeks transfer-wise. I'm looking at some clubs, and I know they're getting frustrated and they want to do some business.